think that there's very much sort of a golden age of recently of a very impressive advancement in artificial intelligence.
Move over, baby boomers. It's time for Gen XYZ. It's time to stop waiting on the world to change. It's time to be the change. It's time to stop thinking about how your life can be better. It's time to start taking action, massive action to improve your life. Join Zach Winter and Marcader Rios every week as we learn how others had the grit, determination, and conviction to 10x their lives, and as we explore ways that can help you 10x your life.
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of X for Gen XYZ podcast. I'm Zach Winter.
And I'm Marcader Rios.
And today as our guest, we have Neil Holtzschulte. Neil is a science fiction author. He's published many articles in Amazing Stories magazine. He's also the author of Files, which is his debut novel. He's also a distance runner and a teacher of both math and computer science. And he's very knowledgeable about artificial intelligence. So I'm looking forward to having a good conversation AI with you as well, Neil. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So why don't we start by talking a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my undergrad degree is in mathematics from Williams College, and my master's degree is in computer science from University of New Mexico. And my research while I was there was focused on biologically inspired computation applied to program debugging and also computer security. So the idea there is that you take inspiration from genetics and apply it. So you treat the computer program as if it was DNA. Mm-hmm. You say, okay, well, we're going to make copies of it, mutate them. We're going to perform operations like crossover, and then you evaluate them. So you've got tests to see, does your program do what it's supposed to do, right? And anything, most of the programs, they get worse. You mutate DNA, usually it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So, those don't produce offspring, but many of the programs are at least neutral and, they can produce offspring, and perhaps some are even passing more of the tests than the original. And then those obviously, maybe if they pass all the tests, you're done, but otherwise those produce more offspring, and then you sort of go from there.
You're kind of replicating the natural evolutionary process where you look for the mutations that improve the program, and then you continue to build on that.
Exactly.
Fascinating. And what types of programs were you working on where you applied that kind of technique?
So there was a really big data set of programs, and what we did was we took open source projects that had their own test suites. So basically, these projects, you have certain inputs and you expect certain outputs. So every test is that. It's just an input-output pair. And, you get the output you're expecting. Great, it passed. You don't. Bad, it failed. But we wanted to, take real-world programs. And so open source is a huge resource for that. And gathered up all these programs. And what was great about them was that because of things like version control, like GitHub, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically where you've got a big old history of the code base and the project, you can look at the changes that were made over time and the change that the human made before and after. So before when it failed the test and after when it passed, so that you can see the difference that the human made. And then you can also compare that to the change that our system actually made to the code, because our we were operating on the source code level, like the human readable level of the code, not like assembly or ones and zeros where like you look at it and be like, well, I don't know what that does. No, we were operating at a readable level.
So you're using AI generate these different versions of the code or mutations of the code?
Yeah. And well, actually, I want to say that I wouldn't actually say that we were using AI. The biologically inspired aspect, artificial intelligence is a very broad term, right? And sort of within it, you can talk about neural networks. You can talk about machine learning, and then those are subtly different, if you're talking to a very technical person. And so evolutionary algorithms, I would say, is maybe a subset of artificial intelligence, maybe its own sort of thing. And that's what we were using. Yes.
I don't know if it's a versioning control, but this is like, you might also be able to apply it to blockchain algorithms as well, correct? In terms of, I guess, tracking almost in the same way that you are tracking versions, of changes on GitHub and things like that.
Yeah, potentially. So blockchain is a distributed ledger. That's sort of that's what it is. That's its functionality. And you could certainly keep track of the many versions, the past history in that fashion. A very interesting avenue of the research was the idea that, so the application not to program repair, not to the debugging, but potentially to security. And the idea is that computers continue to grow in sophistication, and the attacks made against them, there's very much an analogy to biological illness. I mean, we call them viruses, we call them worms, things like that. And so the idea was that you could diversify your programs in an automated fashion. Now, the program still needs to complete the task that you ask it to do, but maybe the manner in which my copy of the program completes the task is different from the manner in which your program completes the task, like under the hood. And maybe we don't both have vulnerability in our different software versions to the same sorts of viruses. Anyway, that was one of the far out sort of ideas. That was one of the big vision ideas of the research.
How long were you conducting the research?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. I mean, I got involved with that project fairly early.
Yeah.
So I think I was there about 4 years doing that. I was actually in the PhD program. I ended up just getting my master's degree, and getting out. But
in computer science?
Yeah, in computer science.
Nice. And what would you do after? Where would you do that? That was at Albuquerque?
Yeah, I'm still in Albuquerque. So that was University of New Mexico. And I teach computer science right down the street from there at Central New Mexico Community College.
Uh-huh. And so you're also an author, though, right? You've written a number of science fiction publications, including a novel.
Yeah. So I love to read and write science fiction, and the idea of general artificial intelligence, of like the singularity, is something that's captured my imagination, and so that definitely features in my novel, Crew of Exiles. I don't know if that's featured as much in short stories that I've published, but certainly in stuff that I have in the.
What's your definition of the singularity, Neil? It's a term that's bandied about, but I think different people might have different meaning to it.
Right. So I'm not sure I have a personal definition, because I have looked up the definition before, and what I've seen is the idea that there comes a moment after which we have a completely different future. Everything in our society is affected by this technological growth, and it's an exponential technological growth. And when we say like everything's affected, like very much literally, not just technology we use, but legal structures and our perception of ourselves and what it means to be intelligent, and just everything is changed by this singularity. Now, in my opinion, there won't be a dramatic moment. Singularity has a very specific feel to it. It feels like it's just this moment in time. And in my opinion, the events described when people describe the singularity are happening and sort of are ongoing and will continue to be ongoing.
In some descriptions about artificial general intelligence, it reaches a point where it becomes smarter than human. And because if it's learning and self-iterating and improving upon itself, computers can do it at fractions of a second. There's been some discussion about how that event happened like that, right? Overnight. Okay, well now it's super intelligent above where any human is. And it's pretty interesting to think in terms of like a time scale perspective, like how we're improving slowly over time, but computers are working at such a fast speed that when computers get to the point where they're iterating on themselves and becoming smarter and smarter, that process can process faster and faster. So that event where the computer becomes superhuman in intellect can happen very, very quickly.
Right. And that is something that people who talk about singularity obviously are extremely interested in, and perhaps define the singularity as what you just said, as a computer improving upon itself. And because of the superhuman speeds at which they already operate, yes, it could be a very sudden thing. However, my sort of follow-up questions to that vision of general artificial intelligence is how did we define smarter? How are we, every intelligent system that exists and that we're aware of is built with goals. And I think that's important to remember. Ourselves, humans, we didn't come from nowhere. We have goals, and we evolved in an environment with very particular goals.
Yeah.
Now, our intelligence is somewhat different from many, but not all other creatures, in that we can sort of self-evaluate and decide, I'm going to not forever suspend my goal of getting food, but maybe temporarily, and I'm going to focus on something else. Or, I'm going to decide not to have children, and I'm totally fine with that goal. And evolutionarily, evolution would say, oh no, that's terrible. But we have the capability of reflecting and sort of deciding for ourselves, hey, that doesn't work for me. I want to do a different thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, even all that reflection and all that ability evolved in a certain context that did have goals. And so when we talk about general artificial intelligence as being smarter than human, we can certainly sort of imagine that, right? You sort of imagine a human, but with a really high IQ, Sherlock Holmes or whatever, who's solving the mystery, instantaneously by putting together all the pieces and the clues. But how did we tell that thing, make yourself smarter? How did we measure intelligence? Because a lot of the ways in which we measure human intelligence is itself flawed. IQ is a classic, but it's a lot of logic puzzles. It's a lot of pattern recognition, and that's great. That's fine. I mean, it would be awesome to have AI that are superior to humans at pattern recognition, but in many specific domains, we already have that.
And I'm wondering if it's maybe the goalpost isn't quote unquote smarter, but there's also the track of, that point in which they become sentient, or what we feel might be a self-aware organism, or you know what I mean? Like where they start on their own, baby steps, and then moving on. And it's not necessarily smarter. It's just that all of a sudden this whole pathway opens up where their growth is unlimited.
Yeah,
the possibility.
I'm super interested in the self-awareness question. There's a book, it's called The Technological Singularity, by, I want to say, I forget who the author is, but anyway, it's called The Technological Singularity. It's MIT Press, and it talks about this question of self-awareness. And I found that section of the book so fascinating, because it was basically saying, this is a frontier which we really do not know that much about. It felt like as I was reading that, I was like hearing the Star Trek intro of like boldly going, to a new frontier, because we consider ourselves sentient and self-aware, right? And I can describe to you my experience as a human being, how it feels to me to be in this chair, speaking with you, and how I perceive you, and all these sensations that I have, and reflect on that further and say like, and here's how I feel about feeling and things like that, right? And we don't have AI that can do that. We have really smart, the AI can play Go amazingly well, but it can't reflect on like, well, what's it like to play Go that well, and so I'm really interested in that because I think it's a wide open sort of scientific frontier and a question that we really do not understand. What is the mechanism by which, organic matter, carbon and oxygen and hydrogen, comes together and decides it has feelings about feelings? Like, wow.
I mean, some might say it's a happy accident. I think that from given our kind of level of resources and intelligence, I don't even know if we can program for that.
Yeah, that there's one type of technology in the discuss how we get to AI. It's called whole brain emulation. So basically, you take a brain and you take little slivers of it and you digitize it, and so that you have the brain. And then once you digitize the brain, okay, well now you're on a computer, you're in cyberspace, and can you iterate on your brain that you created and make it smarter and smarter? So that's one way. There's a discussion about, is that AI? Is it super intelligence? And maybe that's stepping stone to get to really, really super intelligence.
But okay, so when you say digitize, are you talking about just offloading data to a hard drive? Like is that what that means? Like, and so is data, I ask you guys this, is data the pathway to, like, I feel like there's a fourth dimension somehow that we can't capture yet, that is, or maybe something. I love Inception because it just, you can kind of think about it and maybe you can have the answers there, but like there's something there that needs to be activated that's beyond our current perspective and capabilities. And it may not be through the 2D world of just data, data imprinting from a brain, maybe. I don't know.
We're often a very theoretical conversation on this because although the concept that Zach described of, use like MRI or whatever and take this very fine-grained imaging of a brain and see how it's connected and then simulate that or otherwise design it and run it, that is, maybe you could do it for not a human brain. A human brain literally just too big and too many connections at this point with our current technology.
Yeah, we're not there yet with our current technology, but I think they're doing it with very small.
You have to map something like that, right? Like say it.
You do.
An MRI is a certain.
They're mapping, the neurons and everything and connecting it all
to thoughts or to data, or do you know what I mean? Like, what's the end point of say you have a heat map in an MRI. Okay, it gets hot at this synapse fire. We have to connect it to a data piece, right? They're thinking of this while this is firing, and then you have to map all of those billions of
instead link computer software from code. That's artificial intelligence. There's another thought that there's another way to do this, which is to take a human brain and scan it, and that becomes essentially, instead of writing the code, that's organic, brain is now converted into software.
Yeah, and Mark, I think you're getting at some of the nitty-gritty details, which are more important than nitty-gritty. They are more than just nitty-gritty. Like, one is, yes, even if you have that simulation running, how do you feed it inputs and receive from it outputs in a way that makes sense, because yes, you could simulate maybe all the neurons connection and firing, but me as a human being, I also have a very sophisticated user interface, that being my senses, my speech, my gestures as well, right? Not as helpful on podcasts, the gestures, but and also, and I think this is not quite what you meant by fourth dimension, but you said fourth dimension, and that really sparked something for me, which is a organic brain. I won't even say human brain, just any living brain is not just a structure. It is an in motion thing. Even when we sleep, it's not like everything shuts down. Like, everything shuts down when you're dead. Like, there is no other shutting down. It's still active. There are still neurons firing all the time. I don't know how many neurons are, firing in per millisecond or whatever, but many, I presume, a large number. We have billions of them, right? And so I think that even with the idea, and it's still a scientifically very interesting and I think valuable approach of like MRI slices, fine-grained, actually fully recreating some brain, there is still sort of the issue of, okay, you captured it at a instant in time. What now? How, do you run it forward from, maybe you can, maybe it's just that easy. I don't know that you can just run it forward from that instance, but a moment in time is not a brain. Like, because that, a moment in time, it might as well be dead.
And also, just to add to the, I don't even know if it's complexity, if that's the word, but keep in mind that there's some really strong evidence that this whole dome that we have, and me included here, the shiny dome, that it's almost like a Marconi radio, that we might also be receiving and transmitting in ways that aren't just neurons and synapses inside of our heads, but that we're receiving somehow frequencies in electromagnetic types of forces as well.
That's why I think that the experiments are really interesting of that simulation, because I think what it'll show us is, what are we not accounting for?
It's crazy, actually.
There's so much in the media, on social media right now, on artificial intelligence, specific artificial intelligence programs that they seem to be cropping up a lot more now than a year ago, right? With Chat GPT, with all of the artwork that you're seeing on social media, with Tesla and others trying to master full self-driving. Is that, what do you think, Neil? Are we at a point where there's a lot more specific artificial intelligence that's hitting the market and that we're seeing right now than a year or so ago?
I do. I think that there's very much sort of a golden age of recently of a very impressive advancement in artificial intelligence. I have a somewhat decent understanding of some of the technology behind the scenes. Like, if someone says convolutional neural network, I have a fairly technical understanding of what they're talking about. I wish I knew, though, like, that's not a new technology. Like, convolutional neural networks are not something that was invented in the past 2 or even 5 years.
What is a convolutional neural network?
So first, let me just say neural network is also biologically inspired, is the idea of simulating individual neurons in a very simplified fashion. It's mostly just connections, weighted connections. And you put some input into however many neurons in the first layer is what it's called. And then that layer, based on those inputs, will either fire or not fire to another subsequent layer of neurons, further activating or not activating or even potentially suppressing those neurons. And then you just have this, wave of interaction propagated forward, where another layer of neurons is connected to all the ones that came before, connected to all the ones that came before that. And at the end, they fire or they don't fire. Now,
is this related to like kind of what Neuralink is working on?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with Neuralink in particular, but that sure sounds like the same.
Well, the Neuralink is a company that Elon Musk formed, and they're working on embedding a chip into your brain, and they've done this now with primates, where there's actually video of this. I don't know. It's incredible. So they've trained primates to basically play Pong, the video game Pong, but with their mind, just thinking of where they want the Pong paddle to, and it works. So it did. Their Neuralink is connected to the computer, and they just basically think, move the paddle up, move it down, and they get rewarded with a little sip of a smoothie every time they hit Pong ball. But that they're at the very early stage of developing that can eventually, they think they'll be able to help people see again if they're blind, or walk again if they've, been paralyzed, and just stuff.
So these neural networks that I'm talking about are not actually connected to biology necessarily at all. It's just the inspiration. And the input to it could be, you could translate the text prompt into one of these, these art generators, or, the text prompt in like the ChatGPT, or it could be literally image data. Like you could just encode the pixels as inputs to different neurons, and each, neuron could be a pixel, for example.
So this technology is like this technology that ChatGPT uses?
I believe so. I don't know ChatGPT in particular, but a lot of the advancements. I was actually looking at the AlphaStar DeepMind, and in particular, it playing StarCraft 2. And so it uses a convolutional neural network, among other technologies, to learn how to play that game. A very complicated game with many possible actions that could be taken at any point in time. And so that's one of the technologies that underlie it. It is biologically inspired, inspired by the brain as we understand it. And it's a really fascinating thing that it works so well. And there have been advancements in that, I think, relatively recently. Some of them computational, some of them in how exactly the network is organized. I believe that's the convolutional part that makes it different from just neural networks. Neural networks as an idea and a concept is quite old in terms of the artificial intelligence field. Also advancements certainly in speed. There are a lot more processor or chips that are sort of dedicated to this sort of calculation. Google's like TensorFlow chips that it uses are made for the purpose of artificial intelligence, and so they can do the calculations that are needed very swiftly. I forgot where else I was going with that, so go ahead and jump in.
I gotta just to maybe shift a little bit, but kind of related. This is a question that I always kind of think about is, in my opinion, in terms of systems, economic systems, probably capitalism is the best that there is right now, just in terms of being able to talk and enjoy the fruits of innovative things like artificial intelligence and all of this stuff that we're talking about now. You really can't be innovative without some sort of freedom of markets and all of that stuff. So what we're talking about really kind of drives at the root of kind of helping humanity in a lot of ways. And so I'm wondering if you guys have seen out there just this crossing, not just the blatant kind of internet selling of ChatGPT for some new kind of, hey, let's use it to kind of, copyright for my website and crap like that. I'm talking about real kind of high level helping humanity. And if you guys feel that capitalism as we know it can kind of bridge the two and allow for this kind of advanced futurology, I guess, to kind of carry on, or if we're going to need to find a new system that will help connect those two, right? Because ultimately, a lot of times capitalism, if it's taken to its furthest extent, gets kind of co-opted by companies and corporations, and then all of a sudden it's a for-profit type of thing, right? So I'm just wondering your guys' thoughts, if you're following me, what your thoughts are on all of that.
Yeah, I think technology has helped mankind in general, and not just in first world countries, but in third countries, they're starting to get some of the benefit of that, right? So if you think about like cell phones, for example, or computers, they're accessible in third world countries, and a lot of the times, people in those countries, they're accessing the internet through a cell phone. So I think there's kind of that trickle down impact where it does benefit mankind in general. But, I think the first world countries bear the fruit of that and the benefit of that first.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that artificial intelligence is a tool, like many other tools and technologies. And I want to say it was William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer, who said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Right. And I feel that that's very much the case with artificial intelligence in particular, and many things in particular. And I do think that it's very important that, well, I would hope that there would be a broader voice in how artificial intelligence gets applied. Because, Mark, like kind of what you hinted at of, if it gets sort of monopolized, if it gets taken over by a small number of corporations who sort of dominate it, where will they apply it? And they'll apply it, to their bottom line. And will that benefit the broader humanity? Because, we were talking about, ChatGPT and the art generation, but there's also really fascinating things going on with advancements in, just to pick an example that I saw, protein folding. So the idea of, hey, you've got a list of amino acids. How does this thing actually shape up when it gets folded? And that has enormous potential medical applications. And
when you say folded, just to kind of, what does that mean in application? What does that mean?
Yeah. So your cells are going to basically print out. Let's just say print out. I mean, they produce these strings of amino acids, and the amino acid, because there are parts of it that have like a positive charge or like a negative charge, it's going to like attract to itself. And imagine like earbud headphone cords in your pocket. They get all tangled in a particular way. Except the proteins, it's more specific because parts of the cord are actually attracted to particular other parts of the cord. Mm-hmm. But it can be really difficult to predict how it's actually going to tangle together. But that's important because the shape, proteins are the nuts and bolts and tools and structures that comprise our cells. And so figuring out how they actually shape up determines what sort of tool you actually have and what its functionality is. And so where we're at, or where we were, where I guess we still are at, is you can know exactly the DNA encodes for this very particular sequence, but what does that do? What does that tool look like? We don't necessarily know. And using artificial intelligence to predict what the shape and structure of that protein actually is has made there have been a lot of advancements in that relatively recently. That there's a wonderful YouTube channel called 2 Minute Papers, and the dude who puts these on, his excitement about these sorts of advancements is infectious. I love it. And he did a really interesting video on that one in particular, and the advancements in predictive protein folding.
If you're able to predict the protein folding, what's the next step? Is it Is it recreating, predicting, and then being able to recreate it, and then somehow, this is so rudimentary, but inject it into a human to achieve a certain result?
Very potentially. Design of customized proteins is very potentially.
And that's different than DNA customization, but it's...
So the DNA would be used to specify the protein, but we need to know what the shape of the protein is going to be on the outside.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, I'm not going to call it quite nanotechnology, but it's at least microtechnology. I mean, we're talking about using DNA to build microscopic machines, because that's what proteins are.
Interesting. Brave new world.
Yeah. I mean, it almost stops you when you really try to look out on the horizon and think about it, right? Because you stop having words because you're trying to describe the possibilities, if you're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that the big question about AI is, what should we do with it? Because, I said oh, it's a tool like any other tool. Yeah. I mean, is it really like any other tool? Because, the general AI, you're talking about a machine that makes itself smarter. It is a tool that makes other tools, right? Like us. I think a tool that makes other tools might be perhaps a better definition, a good definition of general AI.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if I feel like, one of the major goals really is to try to find a way to successfully and safely get off planet, right? To make sure that we have survivability of our species.
Right.
If you believe that we're encapsulated as human beings and originated here on Earth, right? That we got to get off the planet.
Yeah. If we don't event, there's going to be another mass extinction event, right? They've already, that we know of.
Well, that goes back to Timothy there, right? We have to double our intelligence and we have to get off planet. And doubling intelligence implies that we find an energy source that's sustainable and powerful enough to, to make it happen.
I would say, one thing I absolutely want to get off planet. I love, science fiction, and I'm fascinated by the idea of traveling to the stars. But also, in that conversation, always want to say also, we have to take care of home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's maybe the AI, helps to kind of reverse some things, but population, it's not that all of a sudden we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're completely wall to wall populated in every available piece of land that there is, right? I don't think that it's really,
there's actually a lack of population growth right now.
Yeah.
But also just enough.
But also sustainable.
That's the other way. Humankind could we just die out instead of a mass extinction event. We just slowly fizzle out because we're not.
But there are some populations that are growing, just not Western civilization type.
There's so much vacant land world that's unpopulated.
But is it sustainable? Is it habitable, and is it sustainable? Like, is there how do you get infrastructure out there? So maybe AI robots can start building out in the Dakota.
Yeah.
You're right.
And on your question about energy, like we need a better energy source, and we certainly do need to, long term have a better energy source than fossil fuels, because eventually we'll run out. But and as we were talking before we started the pod, there's this recent development at the National Ignition Facility where they were able to reach fusion energy that had a net gain, which was the first time in history. It's like, but that was an experiment, and they pumped a crap load of megajoules in it to do that. So it's not really repeatable at a commercial level yet. But so maybe it's fusion, maybe it's some people say, well, we already have an abundant source of sun. We just need to tap into it more. And there's plenty of open space around the world where we can just put more solar panels Now we have the means of storing it with batteries. So maybe that's the solution.
There's some interesting things going on too with new let's call them materials, but a lot of it is metals too that are being created that haven't been seen before, which are very interesting as well. Yeah, I'm wondering if AI, might help benefit those areas too. And I'm speaking specifically on the ability to store energy more efficiently than we have with lithium or nickel or whatever.
I'm not familiar with. You're talking about some form of battery, and I'm not familiar with AI applied to that aspect. Although battery technology, improving that is that can produce so many gains over so many different places. But absolutely, artificial intelligence applied to material design is something that I think is very interesting, because we have a new method of producing materials in 3D printing. And in particular, something that 3D printing opens up is the ability to, design things in ways that we never really designed it before. I mean, a lot of our structures are shaped the way they are because that is the easy way to put the building material together, But with 3D printing, now it's a different animal altogether. And you may have even seen where you run a computer simulation and you tell it, I want you to optimize for, low weight, high strength or whatever, right? And it will produce this design for this material that has a very organic look to it, where it almost looks like, you've seen like cross sections of a bone where there's all these hollow bits to it, or maybe specifically like a bird bone. And it can still be very strong, yet there are these gaps that, also reduce the weight. It's not just like a solid steel pole or whatever anymore. And I think that is a very fascinating, what's the word? A coming together of artificial intelligence and 3D printing to produce new material designs.
And also, so back to my point about, how we create a fusion between, say, capitalism and all of this advanced technology. But, they have machines now that can go out to real estate sites, big, huge machines. It's a big, giant 3D printer that literally will print out a house on site right there. It kind of travels around in a square, and right now they look like log cabins in a lot of ways, but it basically builds a house. And in some of these areas, they've done them. I don't know if it's Habitat for Humanity, but something in that sort of vein where they're building houses for just across the border. I think it's in Mexico.
Yeah, I think it's in Mexico.
Yeah,
they kind of look like the 3D printers. It looks like they're spitting out concrete almost, right? Or cement.
Yeah. But you brought up a really great thing, because the being able to use artificial intelligence to calculate architecturally the best, weight ratios and design with the most efficient amount of material that also incorporates, heat factors and insulation, all of that stuff is pretty incredible. And we were talking on another pod about this whole future idea of, instead of ordering your stuff at Amazon and it coming, literally going to places where they actually just print up what you want right there. 3D printer, right? And it's done. You have it done in 30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. Have you ever read The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson?
No.
Oh, this is one of my favorite books. It's really super fascinating. And one of the technologies, it's not even you go to a place. It's in home. It's literally, hey, fax me a bicycle. It's that sort of thing. And it just prints it right out. And there you go. Now you've got your physical object comes right into the house.
That takes hoarding to a whole new level, right? Because
there's obviously like enormous implications.
You're printing stuff like your whole house is filled with new things that you.
Thankfully, in the story, you also have a recycler and all that same stuff. You can just feed it right in, and it just dissolves it or back into component.
Actually, I'm going to punch that story into ChatGPT and see if it spits out a really good story.
There you go. Ask it a story.
the hoarder who was trapped in his own apartment with 3D built materials. Interesting.
So on GPT, we were talking briefly before the pod, Neil, about your thoughts on AI can personality quirks. Would spend a little bit on that.
Yeah. So you could go into the image generators or ChatGPT in particular, and you can say not just give me a scene that has these things in it, or tell me a story about whatever. But you can also say, render this scene as if it was painted by Salvador Dali or whoever. You can just name an artist.
Right.
There was a New York Times article recently. I want to say the artist's name is Sarah Anderson, about people were producing fake versions of her comics. Very they looked like her comics. And her comics were in the training set for the AI because it had just sort of scraped all this data off the internet.
Yeah.
And her stuff's all over the internet. And with the ChatGPT, you can say not only write my school essay for me, but write it in the style of as if you were Blackbeard, you were a pirate, and it'll have R's and all kinds of scurvy dog, and it has this personality to it, which I think surprises a lot of people and is a very interesting facet that we are seeing in the more recent AIs that I don't think we're seeing before. There's this idea of the Turing test of if you're interacting with a human and interacting with a computer, but you don't know which is which, can you tell? And it's usually limited to just text interaction. Can you tell which is which?
Yeah.
And I haven't kept up. I mean, they actually hold an annual competition, excuse me. But it sure seems to me that ChatGPT passes the Turing test. I mean, based on every interaction with it that I've seen. And, maybe, given enough time, you can foil it. But, that's true of many things. Wait, where was I going? Right, this personality quirks and traits. So it's interesting, and one really big issue with that is, we were talking a little bit about viruses, worms, computer security earlier, and a lot of what we rely on for computer security is personality quirks and are just individual ways we express things. So, for example, and this is an extremely dated example, but I think it makes a really good point. Back when John McCain was running for president and Sarah Palin was his running mate, Sarah Palin's email was hacked. And all he did was he went to log into her email and said, I don't remember my password. And so it gave him a set of challenge questions, right? And questions like, where did you go to high school? And it's Sarah Palin. All of this information is available on her Wikipedia page, right? So he just went to her Wikipedia page. Oh, she went to Wasilla High. So at that point, the only security that was keeping him from accessing her account was, how did she write it? Did she capitalize it? Did she put a space between the words? All lowercase? Did she abbreviate it? Just, WHS or whatever, how did she write it? And a lot of our security, the biggest security risks today, I would say, are not actually typically viruses, worms. It's phishing attacks.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. And so now you're looking at artificial intelligence that can mimic a human, potentially a specific human. That's more a danger for people who have an enormous corpus of work available online. But
so if you're a hacker, you could use artificial intelligence instead of just you individually trying to fish in, and you send out your computer to a million people at once.
Or even just here's a way you can tell the computer to make itself smarter. Hey, do these phishing attacks, And when you're successful, learn from that, be more successful. What is the ultimate personality of a successful fisher?
Right. I mean, that, then
Do you
that
think
gets
that's
into
going on yet? Do you think you're using AI to do that?
I'm not familiar with any specific cases, but if it's not happening already, I'd be shocked if it wasn't happening soon.
Right? Because the technology exists, right, to do that.
And it's all open source too. I mean, I love open source. I'm not criticizing it for being open source.
Right. Interesting.
But it's a danger that it's open source also.
Yeah. By the same token, though, you also have to, that's just one side of the equation. And so using AI to counter that as well, right? Basically creating an army of gray hat and white hat hackers to counter the black hats,
That's true. And there are already systems that will help. I don't know how accurate they are, but there are systems that exist where you'll plug in some text and it'll be like, no, not human generated. Or it'll say, yes, that was generated by a human. And it's also artificial intelligence on that end. As a teacher, cheating it can be very difficult to detect. And so, an instructor could put in a student's essay and say like, hey, was this generated by a human or not? Now, following up on that conversation, if it says it's generated by a computer, like, I don't know how oh my gosh, I try my best not to accuse anyone of cheating if at all possible, because it's just a nightmare. But there are those systems.
If you gave an assignment and a kid used AI to create the paper, is that cheating?
It's guaranteed they're using it. I'm just going to say that. It's guaranteed they're using it.
Oh, I think there have already been issues of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if they've not gotten caught, they are using it. They are.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
don't care who it is.
Yeah. No, you're right.
The question is, can you have an AI write your term paper and include citations?
Well, okay. So I was reading on Reddit, somebody complaining about that because the citation, basically what's happening I don't know if it's Chat GPT or GPT-3 or one of the other ones, but what it's doing is it's writing, it knows the format of APA 7. It knows what to look for. It actually knows some of the places to find, but the citations, basically it's creating fake citations, creating bullshit. So if you as a professor went to check the citations, you might come up with a 404 page, or you might come up with, it's just but it looks legit. So if you're not checking, and
it has the form, but not the actual substance.
it has the form and it's all made up, complete bullshit.
But it's only a matter of time before you get to cite accurate citations.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's almost a separate issue, because like citations are intentionally meant to be formulaic. So
Well, the problem is that the closed-end learning systems, they're not able to access the wider internet for whatever the ethics reasons or whatever's going on. Right. They're not scraping crappy blogs for things because you have a problem with the quality of information. But by the same token, it's also blocking out legitimate sources of data. And so in lieu of that, it's like, okay, you want me to give you citations, I want to give you what you want, so here's a citation. But it has no access to real info.
Yeah, so there's a concept called garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And yeah, so you've heard of this before. If you feed it garbage data, you will get garbage results. And this is a huge problem with artificial intelligence, especially when, what you're talking about is that saying something that was not scraping the broader internet. But I think more frequently, the problem is that these systems are set up where they just willy-nilly grab everything. And there's no sort of, don't grab that. That's actually garbage. It's grabbing too much, I think. And a lot of garbage is getting in there. And the image generation stuff has certainly had gotten into some trouble with this. I don't remember which specific ones because there's like a bunch of them now. It's not just like DALL-E, and there's a bunch of other ones. But, a lot of them have porn on them and the ability to, and are being used to generate novel porn, which is wild.
What does that even mean?
No, well, here's what it means. It means
Video or
hey,
still image?
I want this specific porn with this specific celebrity. And it has plenty of images of both of those things separately, and it can put them together. And so, that's, I guess like people could have done that with Photoshop already before, but like now you have it as an automated tool, and it seemed like it's really, maybe somebody should have thought of
with
filtering
fake video technology.
and the fake, the deep fakes.
That is bananas. Like,
Right.
Yeah, the DALL-E system, so DALL-E, I'm talking about the AI image generation, that's static images, but like I don't think it's made as much news, but the ability to generate video, artificial intelligence generating video is very much right on the coattails. Like it's being developed, if not already.
Well, there on my Instagram feed, I have this guy that does deep fake, and he's Tom Cruise. Have you seen that guy?
yeah,
No.
He looks just like Tom Cruise.
I've seen the Keanu Reeves guy.
Cruise.
There's like a Keanu Reeves mimic as well.
yeah. And the other thing too that's really, not to be a downer on the whole conversation, because I am, I'm a technologist in a lot of ways. I'm really into the future. I know I won't be around to see half of it, but it's very exciting. The real, when I really sit down and think, when we really kind of explore some of these pathways, and we're not even going deep, is just kind of looking out and trying to really kind of understand if us humans have the moral and ethical makeup to withstand this onslaught of so much possibility to survive. Like just this porn thing that you're talking about, we laugh about it, but really when you really, really think about it, like where does it end? And it's not religion that's going to, or maybe it's not religion as we know it, looking back, that's going to save us. And then I think about, like, if you've ever read, obviously the first and maybe the second Dune novels are really famous, but I think there's 7 actual novels in Frank Herbert's original source writings, and it contemplates all of this. It talks about AI taking over the universe, and he's a real genius in terms of how he created that world and really kind of went down some of these pathways. And obviously it was in the 60s, so some of this technology wasn't there. It was all science fiction, but really the implications of the deeper implications of all of this, and how human beings reacted to his version of AI taking over was basically a jihad that not only destroyed all the machines, but also destroyed a big portion of humanity that was leaning into the AI, and started off without, like, imagine starting all over with no technology. And because you had to, because human beings couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I think that, we all sort of got a taste of the idea that you can't believe what you see on the internet. Even with just Photoshop, right? And then deepfakes came along, and we were like, oh, wow, that's really impressive. And now we can't believe video either, right? And I think there was somewhat, I'm sure some people are panicked about it, but I think there was somewhat sort of a dismissive, well, like, oh, well, I guess you can't just believe anything on the internet. But that, like, to see, and I think a lot of us, or at least my experience, here was my experience. My experience was I saw it and I was like, wow, that's really impressive. And like, I can barely tell that there's like something slightly off, but I felt some confidence and like, oh, I can barely tell. I don't think that that's reliable. I don't think I'm going to be able to tell. And it really is, you know, a wild thing where nothing you see, not audio, not video, not text, can necessarily be trusted as genuine anymore. Because, I mean, there was a brief window of time where everyone, I mean, we're still in that time where everyone had a cell phone and has a cell phone camera. And so, you know, something would occur, you know, I mean, again, a downer topic, but, you know, like a police brutality event, right? And you get multiple camera angles of like this event happening, right? And like, it'd be all over the place. You'd be like, oh my gosh, outcry. And like, that's great. That's important. You know, I mean, accountability, all that. But now, like, you could ask an AI to generate a scene from multiple angles. Holy moly, you can't even trust it. You wouldn't be able to trust that thing. And I think that, I mean, so now we're in that post period where like, oh, you've got a bunch of cell phone video of something. Who cares? You can't trust that. Like,
yeah, there's an elasticity that like we can handle a lot, but now we have to incorporate these possibilities.
Yes.
Of not trusting our senses. But the other thing too is this goes back to that security thing we were talking about with the hackers and the fishers, you know, the fishing expeditions, things like that. It used to be like normally in the normal world, the end goal of the hacking is to get money, right? To scam somebody out of their money. Or, I mean, you know, the election tampering and all that stuff has changed the game a little bit now so that there's a different goal. But on a rudimentary level, using these tools, it's really getting money. And like, if we think about the older people where a big portion of the wealth is kind of concentrated, older people letting technology slip past them, they don't necessarily understand, yet they have this big pot of gold, you know, sitting underneath them that people want, right? That's an issue because they really can't, like if you're at a certain age, you really can't understand that you can't trust your senses. You really
absolutely.
You mean this isn't my nephew? You know what I mean? Like
yeah, really that's what I'm talking about. Those personality quirks or like imitating a particular person, like the phishing attacks. Oh my goodness, the sophistication that is possible with those now is like you said, it's unbelievable. And that, to bring it back to humanity, the human connection, right, is still, I think, one of our most valuable resources. To be able to talk to a person, connect with a person, that's one of the reasons that, like, I'm not actually afraid that, you know, ChatGPT is going to be teaching my classes in a year or 5 years or 10 years. Like, people want to talk and interact with a person, often live. Like, that's sort of a more enjoyable way to do it. We definitely learned that during COVID of like, oh, this online thing is, I mean, it's great, but it is not ideal. And so I think that it would be great if one of the responses to the dangers in this technology was sort of a greater sense of, a greater like active community. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but sort of, I don't know, you know, meet your neighbor and, you know, stuff like that. And sort of knowing people and maybe having more gatherings. I mean, COVID obviously threw tons of wrenches into the gatherings we were having. But I think that that's sort of a place to put some of your eggs is in human connection.
I agree with that. Totally. I agree with that. And I think that, you know, I believe that there's going to be more of a, I guess, fundamentalist or conservative or kind of controlling thought around that because of the fear, you know what I mean? And like, we have to kind of close ranks and tighten up, and wherever that lies on that spectrum, you know, a lot of it has to do and is born through kind of religion, because that's one of the mechanisms historically, but it's something similar to that. But I also think that, as you say, a significant portion of people will also, you know, be elastic in their thoughts and acceptance of it, but also realize hey, the human connection's more, and there might be kind of a return to kind of a simpler kind of human to human type of thing, you know?
Yeah.
When it'll win, I don't know.
Yeah, and that was actually a thought that you brought me back around to, a thought that I lost earlier that I had was, I mean, we don't want to talk only about the dangers, obviously, but the fact that some communities sort of have closed ranks already, and we've seen that in our society, and there's a real danger in that. You know, we've seen the rise. I mean, you guys are Pacific time zone. I assume you're both Americans, but I don't know actually for sure. And you know, we've seen the rise of fascism in this country, and whew, boy, is that scary. And
but it's hard to discern what that is in response to, because it could be a response to what Zach was saying about, you know, this intuitive thought that we're not making enough babies and our people are dying, or it could be just a reaction to others, or it could be a reaction to technology, or it could be just an overall reaction to, FUD basically, about living. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's probably complicated. It's probably a lot of those things together.
Yeah.
It's just the ability now, though, to create. So it's, before it was just like people saying, oh, this is actually reality, not this other reality. But now there's a real ability to create reality. At least in terms of, digital technology. We haven't yet got to faking the outside world yet, but, who knows? Maybe that comes next.
And you think about, maybe as a final point on this, a lot of the major events in the world, the sparking incidents had circumstances that were questionable. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, or the assassination of
Ferdinand.
Archduke Ferdinand, things like that, where afterwards there were some questions about what really happened, and there's always conspiracy theories, but imagine now that they could actually do that and spark.
Yeah, and that was a time in the world where, you absolutely did not have eyewitness accounts or record.
Or you had to work really hard to create
Exactly.
Actually create a.
And that's what you were talking about with the older generation. I think, oh boy, does our society need to have its skepticism catch up with its technology?
Interesting. Yeah. And this has been incredible. So talk to us a little bit about, where people can kind of, catch up to you with what you're working on. Like, do you have a website that with stuff you're working on, your books and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my book, again, is Crew of Exiles. It's available in all the regular places. My website is, you can find me through my name, but my name's hard to spell. So let me give you the alternate link, which is Haste Writing, HASTE Writing, all one word, all lowercase, just a .com. That's where you'll find my book information. And I've also got a YouTube channel where I talk about science fiction mostly, but also just books and writing in general. And then I have a separate channel, which is Neil Holtzschulte. I will spell that just in case, NealHoltzschulte. And I talk, that's just sort of a personal channel. I have programming tutorials, but I also have, just video game stuff, just whatever I enjoy or want to talk about over there as well.
So, great.
And thank you very much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation. I love that we just went all over the place and covered all kinds of surprising stuff. Yeah. It was great fun.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Neil. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
10X for Gen XYZ is hosted by Zach Winter and Mark Adair Rios, co-founders of Prosperity CRE, a commercial real estate investment firm committed to providing its investors with ongoing cash flow and building long-term wealth. If you like the podcast, please give us a positive rating and subscribe to be notified about future content. Also, if you'd like to learn more about our approach to real estate investing, you can download a free copy of our real estate investment book, Investing for Cash Flow and Long-Term Wealth, by clicking the link in the show notes below. Thank you and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes.